When a magician stands on stage and produces a rabbit from a hat, we call it magic. When an artist sits in front of their drawing pad or easel and creates a window into a world, we call it art. When a group of people sit around a table, holding a conversation, rolling dice, and a whole world appears, we call it role-playing. Hey there, viewers. Welcome to Stochastic Agency, where I continue my efforts to avoid the cliches of your world building, your adventures, your NPCs, your players, and sometimes even you, suck. Before I get started, though, I want to thank everyone who has watched a video or subscribed, and especially you unique viewer. In today's video, let's look at something a little bit different. Will it transform how you play tabletop role-playing games? Can it help you have a better experience at the table? Well, it might if you're willing to go down this rabbit hole with me for a little while. If you believe what the titles say, and the contents tell you in many of those "Your Stuff Sucks" videos, there would appear to be a common denominator, right? Is it how the game is played? Is it how the game is prepped? I'll say it's both, and I can sum it up in one word: story. Maybe you've struggled to create stories that feel alive and meaningful, right? That is, if that's what you care about, and that's what your group is playing for. But some groups, they don't care. But story, or at least the idea that storytelling is essential, has been pushed so much that it's become the default object of play for many. And it's not that the idea of a good story isn't necessary, but I'll say that both play and prep are parts of the problem on your way to story. It's because story isn't something you can dictate all the time in a role-playing game. It's more often something that just emerges. I'll suggest that you put context and engagement first, and then just let emergent play happen. So let's dive in. Why context is king? First, let's discuss a foundational stone in this approach: context. Playing in context versus playing for story sounds a little bit strange, doesn't it? Well, sure it does. But story is the narrative arc. It's the grand tale of heroism, the betrayal, the dragons. It's the plot beats, the climaxes, the all-important ending. On the other hand, context is the why, the how, and the world around those moments. It's the tapestry of culture and politics, the personal motivations, and sometimes even the weather, that makes every choice feel grounded and have the potential to create meaning. Context doesn't just answer what happens next, it frames every action and decision and informs the consequences. The context is the kingdom itself, the landscape, the laws, and the hidden tensions that shape every interaction therein. Without strong context, even the most dramatic story beats can come off a bit weightless. The GM has just said a rebellion is brewing. Well, that's just a plot point. It tells the player what's happening, but it doesn't show it, and it certainly doesn't make them feel it. You've heard that right before. Show, don't tell. But I don't really think it's ever been joined with feel it. Why? It may be because many of the tools that we've used in the past and that players might have experienced, right, are getting changed or dropped altogether. What do the characters do with all that hoarded treasure? Well, the economy is not essential in this game. Shopping and buying stuff is considered not fun. Keeping track of money and doing math, basic math, is also considered not fun. Travel in some games has been curtailed or is becoming totally irrelevant, and character backstories, well, who's supposed to be shining a light on them anyway? Downtime has recently had some increased spotlight time, with various games systematizing it. So am I saying that you should put all this stuff back in if it's been taken out? No, not necessarily, but you can still show it, and you can still have the characters feel it whenever possible. So let's reframe that a rebellion is brewing storybone. Now imagine that throughout one session, or throughout three, the players see a tax collector squeeze every copper from struggling farmers and shopkeepers. There's the tried and true tavern whispers, hinting at underground movements, and graffiti denouncing the ruling class. Add in a few nobles tightening their grip after a minor event because they're afraid of the unrest, And then, while passing through a market, the players hear about the NPCs praising some of these rebels, while others condemn them and say they should be hung. Now the rebellion isn't just a background plot point. It's context woven into the world. The players shouldn't just hear about it, they should see and experience it, and if you can, make them feel it. Now be prepared for the players to engage with a rebellion in an unexpected way. They might align with the rebels, they could double down and support the ruling class, or try and play both sides to their own advantage. This is how each choice shapes an emergent narrative within the context of a living world. Build a living world. You've seen these videos, right? The gamer and writing videos on world building. Here, though, I'll add that if you're the GM or a group of players who are going to design a world, design it if the characters don't exist. You can do this even if your group works to build the world that they're going to adventure in. You know, what are the goals and factions? What's the economic system? But you're telling yourself at this point, am I not supposed to only build what gets used? That I've got to focus on what we're going to play in the next game session? Well, if you or your group are collaborating, I'm going to tell you to be selfish for a little while. Build what interests you. Do the players need to hear or know everything done to construct a living world? No, absolutely not. There is no need to rush out in a hurry and explain how the world is. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to create a world that is not in a hurry to explain itself. See a link in the video comments below for more on that. So this part is for you, Game Master and collaborators. It's part of what will keep you engaged and interested and prevent some boredom or potential burnout. Just remember that keeping some mystery, that thing that far too many game settings lack anymore as they delve into every minor detail, telling you every little thing that was to be discovered already, done by other NPCs. If you avoid that, you've got a lot left to work with. You can do this as a group, and in order to do that, I'm going to recommend this little game called Microscope. Now, you can use a game like this to turn the whole exercise of world building into a little game, and you can really generate some interesting developments. But all this time, you still need some context so that players feel like their choices can ripple through a world that reacts. So there's this huge thing that causes a lot of uncertainty that you're going to need to do. Embrace player agency. You have repeatedly heard that you can't prep for everything. You cannot predict how the players will react, and when they do, they're often just going to go off the map. Trust that the players will surprise you, because they will. Let player choices drive the narrative from the get-go. This can easily take root by giving the players something to lose or gain. A noble may offer them land for their loyalty if a rebellion is the thing. Was the player running from something that they described in their background? What is the character doing now to show that? And if they can't show that, it's a good time for it to show up. This is one that will go against the grain and stands against much of the advice out there for running tabletop role-playing games, because so much of it is about having fun. Take what the characters own and threaten everything they love. Nothing is more personal when the character has had to fight for something and gain it, and then it's stolen. Or maybe a criminal organization threatens players' loved ones or other people important to them. Now, this is going to ruffle some feathers, but I'm not going to apologize for it. All that time you just spent carousing drew attention to your newly acquired wealth and creates some envy. And while I'm a fan of player characters in every game I've ran, they will never lack for consequences and repercussions for their in-game actions. Engagement is queen. If context is the king, the setting of the stage, then engagement is the queen, ruling over all of the players' experiences. Context alone is not enough. Players need to care about what's happening in one form or another, mechanically, story, narrative, whatever it is. That's where engagement comes in. Engagement happens when players feel their choices matter and when they connect to the world. It's the difference between watching a movie and playing a tabletop role-playing game. So, what does engagement look like for some? What makes players care? Well, it could be heatedly debating over a moral dilemma, forging alliances with some, and making enemies with others based on real stakes in the game. The tension rising as decisions loom to fight, flee, or negotiate. And more importantly, the laughter and gasps around the table as things unfold unpredictably. So let's compare a couple of styles of play, right? A low engagement GM pre-plots a so-called epic story, assuming that the players will find it thrilling, but more often the players feel it's railroady because their input just doesn't matter. You've been here, you've done that, you've heard me mention it, you've watched countless videos, and some people will argue that railroading is not what you think. Now, a high engagement GM, on the other hand, builds an unstable world where factions clash, and the player actions do inform how and when that war begins. Now the battle matters because it's a natural result threaded throughout their lives. Engagement thrives on investment, and emotional connection is one. Now, NPCs and factions that have distinct personalities, motives, and flaws all contribute to this. The rebellion becomes more than just a backdrop when it's your former mentor or a former ally leading it. It can result from the economic strain, cultural divides, NPC ambitions. You give the players these pieces to explore and put together and see what they build. Now, I've had discussions with friends of mine about this approach, and many will always tell me the same thing. You're just going to be reactive, aren't you, all the time? Well, you're doing that already, right? Every time you sit down to play a game? Do your players always stay on script? Do you not always have to improvise something during play? So how much do you already have to come up with on the fly? All right? It's not that hard. Now let's introduce two big snags: uncertainty and improvising. Instead of you know exactly what will happen, make players weigh risks and give them time to do it. If we sabotage the supply lines, is it going to help the rebels or cause famine? When you play with reactive consequences, it increases the number of possibilities. You can do this. Engagement is highest when players see the world react to what the characters are doing. If players bribe the guards, how many of the other guards are going to start asking for bribes? If they burn down the bandit camp, do the survivors, if there are any left, plot revenge? No action should be left in a vacuum. But what do you need to prep? How do you even get started? Well, that depends on your group's interest, right? Adventure gaming is the easiest because it requires very little player investment. You know, we're here to kill monsters, take their stuff and level up kind of a game. You know, the murder hobo stuff that everybody talks about, only with destructible environments and more choices and a heck of a lot more uncertainty. You just need enough to get started. And then what you need to continue is contained in your last session. The dogma of GM writes bunch o' plot hooks, or that they need to pitch a campaign idea, is as old as the hills these days. It's also the source of many dead games and half-completed adventures, as the steam and interest in what first got the game started waxes or wanes. But what is enough? If you've got a setting to play in, you know, that city, town, village that everyone says you need to make as a starting point, just put your characters in it. Let them go. Let the players play their characters and tell you what they're interested in. In other words, let the first session be a chance to breathe for once and explore and get to feel the game without the pressure to buy into the first plot hook dropped in the water. Go on a walkabout. Learn about the setting and the characters in it, and let the characters live a little in a living world. This is the build it as you go within the context of each session, and it builds on the events of the last session. So whether it is a module you bought or it's homebrew you're running, prioritizing context and engagement with all the players at the table allows them to become empowered to shape the game in a personal way that becomes exciting to them. Now, if your group can come together at the start, agree, collaborate, and importantly, openly discuss what's interesting to them, then you've got a head start. When context and engagement work together, a story is born. A story is their child. Now let's talk about story. The child of context and engagement. I've said it, a great story isn't something that's written in advance in a tabletop role-playing game. The one-shot, the module series, the campaign setting can all serve as context for what I've mentioned. Instead, it is the organic, emergent results of a contextually rich world that reacts to invested players allowed to make real choices. This is the story as a byproduct of playing the game. It's not thinking in act structures, nor is it playing the game from any heavy-handed, preconceived contrivances. A planned epic showdown between the villain and heroes at a particular time, in a particular place, at a particular point in the story-first approach is just that. However, a different story emerges if the players outthink the villain, negotiate for peace. Another one emerges when the players totally wreck any concept of a plan and find a different place to have the so-called final battle. Instead of saying, you need to find the lost heir to stop the war, let the rumors swirl. Let nobles jockey for power as war looms. Players could naturally begin to seek out the heir because the world makes it compelling. When you let story emerge, your game becomes something that no one, not official game company material, can do, not even the GM can do, or could have predicted. And that's where the magic happens. When story overpowers context. I'm going to beat this dead horse until I can resurrect it one more time. The GM has a story in mind, and by now you've heard it. Everything is a railroaded plan to fit that story. While it might feel cinematic at this moment, the playing through a story sidelines players. They're no longer shaping much of anything. They are passengers on a pre-plotted train. The story-driven GM believes, this is my story, I need my players to hit these beats. And cohorts of mine will remind me that there are plenty of passive players out there that want to be fed a story. But the thing is, for many others, overemphasizing the making of a story can lead to disengagement. Why bother thinking creatively if the outcome is already set? Why bother playing if I can't change anything that's happening now as it's happening? But a context-driven GM thinks, this is my world, my players are going to shape it. And for players, it's not just about reacting to what the GM says, it's about being proactive, getting the GM to react to the actions you're taking. If you want to engage deeply, ask yourself, what's my character up to right now? What do they do when they're not so-called adventuring? What if I befriend this guard instead of me sneaking past them? What if I don't fight the villain, but I try and recruit them? It's the good part of it's what my character would do. The opposite of the often discussed creepy, boorish, jerky side of the don't be that player syndrome. The more you play off the world's context, the more the game can have the opportunity to come alive. Why really go through any of this? As I've said, the best stories aren't the ones that you're going to write beforehand. The best ones are the ones that are just going to come out of what's happening at the table. They emerge as part of play. So the next time you prep, or the next time you get ready to play, ask yourself, how does this fit into and shape the context of a wider world? How and will engagement with this event shape our experience? How does the experience of this shape or possibly shape the context for the next session? And when you're getting ready to play a character, who are they? What do they believe in? Why are they doing the things that they do? So if you have tips for emphasizing context and engagement in your games, put them down below. How are you changing how you engage with each other at the table? Share them in the comments below. Like, dislike, subscribe, as I always say, and if you would like to hit the bell for more offbeat tabletop RPG esoterica, it's down there. Until next time, remember that uncertainty is an essential and inevitable and all-pervasive companion on your way to a well-played game.